Hey guys, what's up? I'm going to try to make a short video that's actually short for a change. This continued controversy about what I have to say about the domestication of animals and what the implications are for what you should actually do with pets that you own. What I said recently in disclaiming that I did not feel that my critics were worth addressing was very specific. People have overlooked what I actually said, which was that I did not feel any of those responses addressed my original argument, addressed what I actually had to say, and therefore there was no point in my just reiterating, in my just repeating what I had already said in earlier videos. So again, you can go through the past history of this channel and see what I actually had to say, what I actually believe on this issue. And this continues to be a problem. So Unnatural Vegan presents herself as endlessly erudite, but at no stage has she shown any sincere interest in what my position actually was, nor did she ask me about it. If there's something she wanted me to clarify, she could have asked me to clarify. But I feel that Unnatural Vegan, like many other overly emotional pet owners, they simply hear, this person has dared to criticize the fact that I own a dog, or the fact that I own a cat, and then emotion overrides reason, and they freak out, basically. They're not responding to what I actually have to say, the suggestions I've actually made. So in my recent video on this, my most recent video, the examples I gave were, for instance, the difficulty of providing a penguin with an environment in a zoo or in a in a species conservation effort, trying to provide penguins with habitat that resembles what they would have in the wild. It can be very expensive, it can be very difficult. But my point that's been made consistently through all of my videos is that when we take the wilderness as a criterion for what is adequate, for what is moral in providing to an animal that is in our care, we come to a completely different set of conclusions about what to do with whether it's dogs, cats, penguins, lions, what have you. Again, there's nothing mysterious about it. There's nothing hard to understand about it. At no point did I say that people who own... Again, what did I actually say? There's an example given at length about someone who owned rabbits, and they were rescued rabbits, but in thinking about this issue, this is someone who understood what I said, of thinking about how the rabbits would live in the wild. This vegan, she adjusted the way she was keeping the rabbits to make it closer to. Just the same way that the enclosure for penguins at the zoo is not going to be perfect, or if you make an enclosure for polar bears or something. Questioning how we treat captive animals in general in terms of what would be their natural way of living in the wild, and of trying to provide them with a life closer to what they would have in the wild. For that viewer of mine, that led to, decisive steps. She didn't release her rabbits into actually living in the wild, but she took steps to provide them with an environment that was closer, that gave them a little bit more of a natural habitat where they could see the sun and, dig in the earth and chew on grass or what have you. So, all of my arguments on this have admitted, and have not only admitted, they have emphasized, they've drawn attention to the contradictions and complexities and difficulties we get into, whether it's keeping tigers captive or keeping cats. And, it's true on a very fundamental level. I reject, for example, the assumption that Unnatural Vegan presents that we can simply use as a philosophical concept the idea of a good home, of providing a good home to a dog or a cat. Because when she says that, she is using a human-centered standard. So this is speciesism and it's anthropocentrism. There are a lot of problems with this. What does it mean to provide a good home to a penguin? We take as a standard how they would live in the wild, and then we see how close we can come to that. The zoo has a limited budget, or if it's a government rescue program, these penguins have had to be scooped up because their habitat was destroyed. Some situation, so you're responsible for taking care of a bunch of penguins. The fact that you are going to provide them with a good home is not a moral justification for castration. It's not a moral justification for training them, for domesticating them to live on your couch as your companion, as your pet, as your entertainment. None of that is morally justified by the act of rescue. So my ethical and pragmatic approach to this is fundamentally different from other vegans. So yes, to me it is stupid to hear someone who is a vegan justify whether it's buying food, buying dead cows to feed to a cat, and I talked about that at length, or if they justify the domestication itself because this animal was acquired through rescue. So I said, if you are in the position of rescuing a bunch of penguins, how is that justified? How are you going to treat them? For one thing, you have to take their life in the wild as a criterion. Try to provide something resembling that. And of course, secondly, it's justified because you're trying to preserve the species. You're trying to eventually reintroduce them into wilderness, into wild habitat. And that's the difference between a legitimate rescue of penguins and a zoo or a circus, or someone who owns animals for their own pleasure as so-called companion animals. Okay? So the point is, I did present a nuanced argument. I think it is either insincere or inept for a natural vegan to pretend that I was recommending people simply take house cats and introduce them into the wild immediately. I don't even recommend that about penguins. I don't even recommend that about tigers. All of the examples I used, discussed at length, I mean, this adds up to many, many minutes now, presents a nuanced view of the world. But the sense in which it's not nuanced is that, yes, I am willing to look at the status of a dog in the wild, whether it's a feral dog or a genuinely wild dog, a dog that's never been domesticated in its history, and say, look, that is how this animal lives in nature, and we are depriving it of its dignity, we are depriving it of its freedom if we castrate it, train it, break it, make it into a servant to human beings, make it into entertainment for human beings. I don't know, the same vegans who will say it's immoral to ride a horse, for some reason, do not see it as being immoral to really harm a cat or a dog, to try to turn it into a toy and a plaything that lies on your couch while you watch TV or that entertains your children. All right? That's not what a cat wants to be. It's not what a dog wants to be. That dog wanted to have its own sex life, have its own children. It wanted to explore the wilderness, hunt, etc. Now, can you provide that? Probably not. Can you provide it for a lion or a penguin? But yeah, ethically, this is a completely different paradigm. I'm looking forward to the future of veganism. We're talking about, what, 200-year transition? I mean, we're not talking about overnight this kind of change. And I mean, it seems to be completely insincere for a natural vegan to question, well, how are people taking my advice on board? I've already talked about that. I already talked about one viewer who looked at and correctly understood the analysis that I set out, and who looked at her own rabbits and thought, how can I provide some kind of habitat, some kind of experience that resembles nature a little bit? And yes, exposing animals to natural habitat exposes them to risk. Exposes them to risk of disease. I mean, if a cat is killing and eating rats, the cat can get all kinds of illnesses that it wouldn't get from eating a completely antiseptic and hygienic factory-produced food product. Yes, it's true. You're exposing them to the risk of predation, of predators killing them, of disease and what have you. But you're also giving them a shot at having a life that has a shred of dignity because it has a shred of a resemblance to what they would be in the wilderness. So this began with, long before talking about a natural vegan, I was talking about the fact that vegans had tried to make a symbol out of piglets, the cute piglet, and arguing, look, you can take a pig, you can chop its balls off, you can castrate it, domesticate it, train it, you can force a pig to become a cute plaything for human beings. And what I was saying was, no. For me, domestication of animals is exploitation of animals. This is something I regard as immoral. This is something I regard as psychologically unhealthy, even if you say you love the pig. And I feel that many vegans are in denial about the reality of how a pig lives in the wild, of what the natural relationship is between a human being and a wild boar when you meet a wild boar or a feral pig in the jungle. Okay? Said this before. Feral pigs kill and eat large mammals. A wild boar will gladly kill and eat a wild deer. Put it into Google image search, you're going to see a ton of images of wild boars killing and eating deer. It is shocking, it is stunning, because we think of pigs as cute, as harmless, as domesticated, whether it's on farms or in your living room. But I'm telling you, that is not what a pig is. Whether it's a pig or a penguin, we have to be willing to start with the criterion of the wild, the status of the animal in the wilderness, and then think through in the future, what's our role as human beings in managing these animals. The reality is Canada is an enormous country with huge amounts of empty open space. But still, even for polar bears, wild polar bears, human beings are very actively involved in managing them and trying to make sure they don't starve to death, looking at their distribution, looking at the distribution of the prey they rely on, trying to manage climate change. The reality is wild animals in the 21st century all are indirectly impacted by human beings, including wildlife management. Okay, I accept that. I'm completely cognizant of that, right? So, I mean, the question of, in the next 200 years, how is the relationship between a human being and a dog or a cat going to change? This is an issue I'm sincerely engaged with as a vegan. And the question of how a relationship with bears and tigers and lions is going to change is also one I'm really concerned about. I do not feel that 200 years from now in the future, we should have zoos or circuses. Okay? I also do not feel that we should be castrating dogs to turn them into toys and playthings. I don't think we should be training dogs to live a life that is completely unnatural for them so that they can provide so-called companionships for us, or so that we can experience love or they can experience our love. No, that to me is unnatural, and maybe that's suitable enough because her name is, after all, Unnatural Vegan.